So the 2022 Proton Iriz facelift has just been launched, and it's a pretty major update. You've got the usual lights and bumpers, of course, but also a somewhat opinion-dividing crossover-styled active variant, a surprisingly fresh interior revamp, and of course, the controversial choice of sticking to the punch CVT. There's also no more manual option, the safety features are pretty much the same as before, no improvements there, and prices have actually gone up a bit. Clearly, there are some pretty positive things as well as a few not so good things with this facelift. So 2022 Iriz, let's see what it's all about, what I like about it and what I don't like at all, coming in this video. First up, I do hope that everyone is doing okay at home because this is a pretty rough time we're all going through. I do wish that I can give you a much more first-hand look of the new cars, but we're all stuck at home now with bad hair, as you can see, so this is all we can do without breaking SOPs. Now, those of you who are following SOPs, thank you very much, and those of you who aren't, well, I hope you're happy with yourselves now. Moving on, this video is focusing on the new Iriz hatchback only. I'll have a separate video for the new Persona sedan, so stay tuned for that. Also, I'd like to point out that we do have very limited video footage and images to work with here, so I do apologize for all the repeat shots. Starting off, I should mention that I've always been a fan of the Proton Iriz. My very first YouTube live car launch coverage was for the original Iriz back in 2014, and coincidentally, it was also on my own birthday. So you can say that I've always had a soft spot for the Iriz, and last year, finally, I got one for myself. A 1.3 litre manual. It's such a lovely, lovely city car. The thing is though, as much as I like it 7 years on, there's no denying that it's an old car now. Most other cars that were launched in 2014 have already been replaced by a whole new generation by now. The Honda City, Mazda 3, Mercedes-Benz GLA, BMW X5, and so on. But for the Iriz, we get yet another facelift. And yes, I know there are also a few models even older than the Proton still on sale today, like the Proton Iriz, Toyota Avanza, Mazda 6, Ford Ranger, so yeah, it's not the only one. If you've been following the model closely, you'll know that this isn't the hatchback's first refresher. It's not even the second. At launch, the Iriz was a good-looking car with great specs, but it was marred by a less than ideal CVT transmission. Let's just put it as that. The response was slow, it was kind of loud and a little jerky, so yeah, it was far from perfect. Come 2017, the Iriz Refinement was launched. This version looked pretty much the same as the original, but under the skin was a much improved package, especially the CVT. Like the codename, it was a much more refined experience. It got new engine mountings, a new exhaust system, and it all worked. It was significantly quieter with a much better response than before. Then came the 2019 Iriz. Proton, now firmly under Geely influence, the B-segment hatchback was given a striking visual upgrade, complete with an entirely different face and welcome tech injections from Proton and Geely's more upmarket models. This time, the main focus was to improve interior build quality while further refining the car's NVH. Fast forward another 2 years and here we are with the current facelift. This round, it's a much more substantial update with the Iriz getting another new set of clothes on the outside and a near unrecognizable fresh interior. There are various improvements beyond that too, but I'll get to that in a bit. What's clear here though is that Proton has shown great perseverance with the Iriz, continuously improving it over the years despite it being a relative sales flop. On that, this was originally planned as Proton's answer to the King of Kings, the Perodua Myvi. Obviously, it missed that lofty target by a huge margin. Still, it's good to see that Proton is sticking to it instead of just quietly forgetting about it like it did with the Proton Suprema S. Remember that? As well as the Perdana, the Satria Neo, the Privé. Anyway, let's talk about the here and now, the 2022 Proton Iriz facelift. There's plenty to cover, so let's start with the styling. There are two very distinct versions of the Iriz now. The standard and executive variants get a new set of front grille and bumper, and I like it. I think it looks much better than the previous version, especially the grille. This is a fresh new look, and the red bow on the grille gives it a nice family tie-in with the X50, as to suggest that these two are targeted to the young and trendy crowd. Comparatively, the Proton Persona has a much more elegant look with more chrome work up front, and even more so the brown interior inside, matching the more mature X70. I like how Proton is differentiating the two models, the Iriz and Persona, using subtle design touches, even though they are now sharing the same face for the very first time. They are also the first homegrown Proton models, as in one not based on Geely models to wear the latest round Proton logo. You can still see that the bonnet has a pointed cutout to fit the old Proton crest, but if you take a step back, I think it all fits quite nicely. This is now the third Proton logo to appear on the Iriz, just goes to show how long the model has been in service. Having said that, strictly from the front, it simply does not look like a 7-year-old design. Even on the side, the new wheels work quite well to freshen up the aging body, plus the distinctive lower side blades still look as good now as it did the day it was born. To me, Proton pulls this trick off even better than the Porsche Macan, which incidentally is yet another car still in service that is older than the Iriz. But once we get to the back, the 2022 Iriz falls a little flat. It's pretty much exactly the same as the 2019 model, save for the red line at the bottom. Proton knows full well that this isn't exciting enough, to the point where it didn't even release any official photos of the standard or executive rear end. The single picture of the back that they did provide is of the new active variant, which is a bit controversial styling wise. Now, the new Iriz Active replaces the premium variant as the new range topper, and it gets a crossover inspired styling package with chunky black plastic moldings all around the car. The recent market shift towards SUVs has certainly played a role here, very much like the similarly designed Produa Asia style from 2019. Now, before you say that Proton is just copying Produa here, remember that Proton had the idea of a crossover style Iriz right from the very beginning, showing off the Iriz Active concept just days after the initial launch back in 2014. Personally though, I much prefer the look of that original concept over the actual car that we're getting now. That being a concept, it had really cool features like next-gen LED glow DRLs and taillights, a floating roof loop that is all the rage now, a digital instrument cluster, and a Tesla-style massive center screen. It's too bad that it had to be toned down for production even 7 years down the road. Back to the real Iriz Active, like I said, this is an opinion dividing model. Some people love it while others absolutely hate it. Now, me personally, I think I fall somewhere in the middle, because in some parts I think it's a really clever redesign. It's a somewhat easy way to create a fresh new look without changing the basic shape of the car. And overall, I think Proton Design has really pulled this off. Here, the Iriz gets a unique silver frame up front that doubles up as a decorative skid plate, a honeycomb insert, rugged over fenders all around, matching two-tone multi-spoke wheels, and roof rails at the top. Beyond that, it's the same old Iriz. Officially, it's 10mm taller than the standard car, but that's all from the roof rails. The ride height is exactly the same. While it's clearly not an SUV, it does give off a little bit of that desirable, fashionable vibe that you get from a modern crossover. The visual package gives off a significantly different look overall from relatively simple additions. In a minimal effort, maximum gain standpoint, the result is a huge success. Of course, I'm not a big fan of everything on it. I think the wheel arch moldings are a bit too chunky, a bit too thick, and the way they stretch towards the front and rear corners look a little forced. Also, the tiny detached bit of trim on the rear doors look really out of place, though of course it's not the only car to have these issues. The Mazda CX-30's plastic fenders are even more exaggerated, and the Peugeot 2008 had the same door cutout too. Now, just for fun, here's the same design with all the black plastic cladding in body color, courtesy of my buddy Theophilus Chin. Looks so much better in my opinion. Even the silly GTI-inspired Allen bolt heads around the fenders make sense now, giving it a bit of that rocket bunny look. So if you really don't like the over fenders, here's something you can easily do. Again, minimal effort, maximum gain. One thing I haven't mentioned yet are the new LED headlights on the Iriz Active, finally matching the Perodua Myvi. But while the Highway King has it fitted on all variants, only the top Iriz gets it. The lower models carry on with lame halogen reflector lights, which are so outdated now. Seriously, once you've driven a modern car with LED headlights, going back to halogens feel like you've gone back in time. Another thing I like to note is that only the Iriz Active gets Goodyear Triple Max 2 tires. The Executive, although it also runs upsized 16-inch wheels with the same tire size, are fitted with Atlas tires, just like the Saga now. As for color options, Proton has gone crazy this time with no less than 7 options, including the Citric Orange and Passion Red taken from the X50. It's nice to see a good selection of bright and vibrant color options instead of the usual white and silver. Which one is your favorite? Let me know in the comments section. For me, yeah, I'm loving my orange X50 and I think it looks just as unique here on the Iriz. Now, finally, we get to the interior where the changes are even more important. Right off the bat, you'll notice the near unrecognizable dashboard, making this feel like so much more than a mere facelift. The upper central pod has been completely redesigned, now featuring a modern-looking freestanding screen. To accommodate the larger screen, the aircon vents have been moved down, now with a more conventional horizontal layout. A byproduct of this change is that the vents will hopefully be allowed to direct air towards your face, rather than directly at your fingers on the steering wheel, like the previous design. Further down, the aircon controls are all new too. Gone are the loose-feeling 3 rotary dials, replaced by digital controls that are similar to the ones on the X50. Now, I should point out that they are not exactly the same, so the comments I've seen online saying that they can now share the same controls as the Lotus Emira on the cheap, sorry buddy, you can't. Well, actually you can, but with the X50, not this. Also, while the controls are digital, it's still a manual AC system, so no automatic climate control here. But at least you still get Proton's N95 cabin filter as standard, which is good to have today. There's still no rear vents either, but that's also the case with all cars this size. Just get a good set of window tint and your rear passengers will be fine. Just below the aircon controls is a set of 3 USB ports for your mobile devices. The Iriz now has a total of 6 USB ports, 3 here, 2 for the rear passengers, and 1 cleverly tucked behind the rear view mirror. Now, just like the X70, this one is meant to directly power your dash cam, so you no longer need to route the power cable all around the headliner. The map lights are new too, now featuring LED lamps like on the Saga. To me, it's the small but important touches like these that I appreciate the most. Now back down below, the entire center tunnel is all new. It's far simpler and neater now with 3 buttons up front for the front parking sensors, electronic stability control, and a new eco mode for the transmission. The gear lever is a carryover from the 2019 model, but it's now standard across the range. Behind that is the handbrake, flanked by a long row of cubby holes and cup holders. Should be handy to hold your wallets and keys and such, something the previous model struggled with. Also a welcome addition is a center armrest, which should please a lot of people. Also new is the steering boss cover, now with the uncaged tiger logo. This is actually a significant change for the Iriz, as previous models have always carried the old flat logo even after the exterior moved on to the 3D logo from 2017. Now finally, the interior has caught up. Overall, I think it's quite amazing how Proton has managed to modernize the interior as much as it has, even despite the obvious limitations it had to work with. If you look closely enough, you can still see that the dashboard is still built off the exact same design as before, but all the new parts really do transform the new car to what it is today. It is quite rare that a mere facelift has such a big dramatic effect inside. The one thing that is showing its age a little bit is the steering wheel design itself. New logo aside, it's a far cry from more modern designs in the X70 and X50 that look one or two generations newer. Another issue I have is the frameless rear view mirror fitted to the 2019 model is no longer available here, but that's a minor gripe. As you can tell by now, all the red splashes in the interior are exclusive to the Iriz Active, which also adds on sports pedals, part leather seats, and my absolute favorite, bright red seat belts like on Mercedes AMG models and Honda Type R. Lower models have all the red bits on the dashboard painted silver. The Executive gets full leatherette seats, while the Standard gets full fabric seats and unfortunately the same old standard audio head unit, which is absolutely terrible. Back to the top of the range Active, it's the only one to get the fully upgraded GKUI head unit. It now has a new interface, and the high Proton voice commands are now no longer limited to the onboard navigation and music apps only. It can now operate the aircon and window too, just like the Geely based models. However, unlike on the SUV models, asking the system to open the windows will only result in the driver's side window coming down. Why? Because that's the only side with an auto up and down function. Okay, let's talk about the mechanical bits. The engines are exactly the same as before. Two options, 1.3 VVT with 95 PS and 120 Newton meters, and a 1.6 VVT with 109 PS and 150 Newton meters. These have not changed at all since the very first Iriz 7 years ago, so that's a little disappointing. But then again, the 1.6 still has a healthy advantage over the Myvi 1.5 in terms of output numbers, so there's that. Now for the transmission, there's only one option, the punch CVT. So for the very first time, the Iriz is no longer available with a manual option. I know, that is really sad, but you know what? That's probably a fair business decision by Proton. And you know why? Because nobody is buying manual cars anymore here in Malaysia. That's an actual fact. So why should Proton continue making them? Based on a recent data I have, only 3% of Iriz customers bought the manual. 3%, and you know there aren't that many Irizes sold anyway, right? 3% of a small number, that's pretty much negligible. And I know firsthand just how tiny the demand was for the Iriz manual. When I was buying one last year, I was told that for a CVT model, I can get one within a few weeks, maybe a month, depending on the color option. But for an Iriz manual, I can have any color I want and have it ready for delivery like yesterday. That's how bad it was. So yeah, don't go blaming Proton for stopping with the manuals because Malaysians stopped buying them first. I'm just glad that Proton stuck with it for long enough for me to buy one for myself. And if you really do want a manual Iriz right now, I'm pretty sure there are still quite a few pre-facelift manuals available in some dealers. Just ask around a little bit. Now let's move on to the CVT. I know, why CVT? Boo, hiss. But you know what I think? I think it's fine. This Proton CVT is one of those things that you really need to try out for yourself. I'm sure you've heard so many negative comments about it. You know, it's slow, it's not responsive, it's loud, but the next question should be, which Iriz CVT are they referring to? Like I mentioned earlier, Proton has improved the CVT by leaps and bounds over the years. The first version had issues, yes, there's no denying that. But since then, the continuous improvements done to it have been impressive. The last version I drove in 2019 had very decent driving characteristics, super refined, by far the quietest in the class. This 2022 version, while Proton has not publicly said anything about the CVT yet, the people I've spoken to within Proton said that a lot of work has been put to further improve it. Now this is both in terms of hardware and software, I've been told. It's now smoother, more efficient, more reliable, the lot. You can see that there are proper eco and sport driving modes too, which are new. I can't wait to try it out myself when test drives are allowed again. And those of you still with doubts on the Iriz CVT, you should too. Once you have, do let me know what you think of it after. Next, safety. This is traditionally Proton's strong point, but here and now, the Iriz is just about okay. It's no longer a class leader in this respect. The Iriz was revolutionary back in 2014, being the first in class and at the time, the cheapest car to have electronic stability control and 6 airbags. But while other brands have soon caught up and progressed even further, the Iriz has pretty much stagnated. This 2022 version has the exact same safety features as the 7-year-old original. ESP and 6 airbags and still no AEB. The standard version has now 4 instead of 2 airbags, sure, but still for a 2022 model I would have expected AEB by now, and so should you. After all, this car's main rival, the Proton Iriz, offers AEB even on its 1.3-litre model, so clearly Proton is lagging behind with the Iriz. Proton still boasts of a 5-star ASEAN NCAP crash safety rating, but I should mention that the result is based on an outdated 2020 testing protocol. There's now a brand new set of tests for 2021 which has a higher focus on active safety features such as AEB and blind spot monitoring. If the Iriz goes through the latest protocol, I'm not quite sure it would get top marks again. So now the last thing we haven't talked about is pricing. The 2022 Iriz now starts from just over 40,000 ringgit, going up to 54,000 for the top spec active. That starting price has gone up a fair bit as the previous Iriz came in from just about 36,000 ringgit. But again, remember that was for the manual version. For the CVT, both the new standard and executive variants are about 1,000 ringgit more expensive than before, which is fair as you do get some extra equipment. The active is now over 4,000 ringgit more than the previous premium, which is a bit hard to swallow. But yeah, I guess all the additional bits and bobs do cost more money. More importantly, the Iriz price range is comparatively very similar to the Proton Iriz, so there's not much difference between the two, especially if you're going to take loans. So choosing between the two comes down to preference, not pricing. So that's about it for the 2022 Proton Iriz facelift. Now I know this is a very long video for what is a simple facelift, so if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate every single one of you. Now do let me know what you think of this video and the Proton Iriz in the comment section below. Stay safe everyone, and bye bye.